And with that, the topic of today is TanStack Start. And in case you don't know, it's a React framework, basically an alternative to Next.js and Remix, or React Router, because Remix was merged into React Router. We explored that in an earlier stream. Oh, and since I'm mentioning it, of course, as always, you will find this stream and all my past streams on Maximilian Schwarzmüller Extended. So that is youtube.com/@Maximilian-extended. I upload all the VODs of all my streams on this channel. So if you miss a stream or if you have to leave early, you can watch it there. That is, of course, also true for today's stream. There you also find the React Router stream, and today it's TanStack Start. And of course, like, a valid question would be, do we need yet another React framework? So another framework building up on top of React? And I guess we'll find out together if we need TanStack Start. I don't know anything about it except for the fact that, as far as I know, it's by the same people, the same person. I guess it's Tanner Lindsay. Is that? I don't even know the name. Yeah, Lindsley, sorry. I think it's by him, the same person who built TanStack Query, formerly known as React Query, which I do cover in my React course, which is an amazing library for fetching data and manipulating data, remote data, I should say. TanStack Start is a framework building up on TanStack Router, as far as I know, but I have never worked with TanStack Router, so I don't know anything about that. And I don't know how it works and how it differs from Next.js. So I guess we'll find out. Now, let's start here on the starting page, because I really don't know anything about it. And if I want to learn something new, that is often how I will start. I will just dive or look at the official page, dive into the official docs, and explore it step by step. So it's a framework with server-side rendering, streaming, server functions, like we also have in Next.js and React Router, Remix, I guess. API routes, so if you, I guess server functions are functions that would be triggered from inside your components upon a form submission, let's say. And then you can, in addition, also have API routes if you need like a standalone route that should basically be exposed like a REST endpoint. That's my guess. Bundling and more, powered by TanStack Router and Vite. I guess everything's powered by Vite except for Next.js. Ready to deploy to your favorite hosting provider. So we got routing, we got all, yeah, okay. Let's take a look at the docs. Now, I could press this button here. I guess I'm taken to some quick start page then. Might be a good idea, but typically I like working with the docs a bit more, like going through the docs step by step, because the problem I have with quick starts is that they might work for a lot of people, but very often you get like a starting project that has a little bit of everything. And whilst that of course makes sense to explore the different features, I personally like to explore them in a bit of a more structured way, I guess, like going step by step with project setup, adding routes, adding dynamic routes, and so on. So that's what I'll do here with help of the official docs. And we start with a page that lets us know whether we want to use TanStack Start, this framework, or TanStack Router. So if we want to go with just the router or the entire framework. And my guess would be, without reading that the difference essentially is maybe that the router does, well, just routing, and TanStack Start also provides server-side rendering, maybe also server actions, exposing API endpoints, and so on. That would be my guess. So we'll see. TanStack Router is a powerful type-safe and fully featured routing system. It is designed to handle the beefiest of full-stack routing requirements. Okay, so it is built, TanStack Router is built for full-stack routing. TanStack Start builds on top of Router's type system to provide type-safe full-stack APIs. So I'll be honest, from this paragraph alone, it's not entirely clear what the difference is, but these bullet points might help. So with the router, we get like TypeScript support, type-safe navigation. So I guess like you define your routes, and then later when you define a link and you put in that that path where you want to go. I guess it checks that against your route definition and lets you know if you set up a link to a page that doesn't exist. That would be my guess. Nested routing, sure. Pathless layout routes, okay, we know that from Next.js too. Route groups, I think is the name in Next.js. Built-in route loaders with what is SWR caching? What is that? Oh, Vercel SWR. Is that like this library by Vercel? Oh, it's a long time since I used that. Okay, so let's just say with caching for client side. So it does caching. Now, it will be interesting to see if it's caching as aggressively as Next.js did, and to some degree still does, because that is not the most favorite part of many people as far as I know. Automatic route prefetching, sure. So we got a lot of data loading capabilities built into TanStack Router, as it seems. Interesting. So TanStack Router already sounds like a mini framework, because all the data fetching and caching parts, that is of course something Next.js also does, but Next.js is not just a routing framework. So TanStack Router already seems to be pretty competent. So TanStack Start then indeed adds the server-side rendering, as I guessed, handles streaming of data to the client. Server functions are then a TanStack Start thing and an RPC. So RPC is like essentially another way of communicating between client and then server. You might know tRPC, which is a very popular RPC implementation, which gives you a type-safe way of triggering API endpoints from the client side, basically. Bundling, deployment, okay. So it's essentially the server-side rendering part and the server functions. Good. Using the Nitro package, which is by the Next team, if I recall that correctly. And, well, I'd say let's just get started with it, shall we? Getting started. Use the quick start examples, build a project from scratch. That is what I want to do. So in order to do that, I will create a new directory, use npm init, so just a regular npm managed project, and then use TypeScript. It's not required but recommended, so yeah, I'll do that. Okay, so let me bring up my terminal here. Like this, and let's go into the streams folder, and in there I'll add my TanStack Start or basics folder. Navigate in there and initialize my npm project, and then I'll also open that. Whoops. Oh, I'm in the project. Let's open it with Visual Studio Code. Here we go. Okay. And then I'll add a tsconfig.json file with this configuration. Sure. Here we go. It's a very lean configuration. Does not enforce strict mode with at least the following settings. Okay, I should not enable verbatim module syntax, but I would say that I should enable strict mode. Yeah, I definitely want to have that. Okay, install dependencies. Hey, Ammo, great to hear that I taught you Vue. Thank you so much. I hope you liked the course, but since I taught it to you, I guess it was okay. Let's install dependencies. So I'll copy this here. Install TanStack React Start, React Router, and Vinci. I'll also say right away that TanStack Start is not just available for React, but I guess since today, if I read that correctly, it's also available for Solid. So you can use Solid.js with TanStack Start if you want to. So that's interesting, but I will use React here. Okay, we also need to install React and React DOM. So, okay, it's still installing this. So I'll do that as a next step, and then thereafter some Vite development dependencies and TypeScript. Okay, we'll do that. Installing React, and then thereafter this here. And last but not least, this TypeScript. Okay. Now I also want to use Git here, so I'll initialize that. And I'll add a git ignore file. Ignore node modules, a .env file if I have any, the good old ds store file on Mac. Yeah, sounds good to me. Okay. So we'll then update our package.json file to use Vinci CLI and set type module. Sure. So I'll copy this. I actually like it that the setup works like this. It's of course definitely not for everyone, but I like it because you really understand what's happening. If you like start with a huge project where you run some CLI command and you get like 5 config files, 20 dependencies, sure, you can take a look at all of that, but often you maybe won't. And I feel like you get a deeper understanding of which things are working together and what's going on if you like really set it up step by step like this. Especially if right now, at least, you don't have a lot of configuration files and so on. So that's nice. We need an app config TS file to configure TanStack Start, so the framework. So I'll add this. Let's see what, okay, that's essentially a Vite config file, I'd say. Configuring Vite and the basically making it aware of the tsconfig JSON file, but wrapping that all with the fine config by TanStack Start or the React Start package. So I guess that also provides some default Vite configuration, because in the docs it also said that it would take care of bundling. Sure. So add the basic templating. There are 4 required files for TanStack Start: the router configuration, the server entry point, the client entry point, and the root of your application. Once configuration is done, we'll have a file tree that looks like this. Okay, so we'll have git ignore, app config. We got these files already. So now we need a routes folder with a __ root tsx file, a client tsx file for the client entry point, the SSR tsx file for the server entry point, I guess, and then these 2 files for defining the routes, I would guess. And the __ root tsx file is the root of the application. Personally, by the way, I absolutely don't like file names that are messed up like this, but yeah, that's what you basically always have when you use some library or framework that uses file-based routing, which I'm not sure if this one does, but that looks like a special name. And whenever you're dealing with a library that works with special file names, you have to live with weird file names like this. Personally, I don't like them. I also don't like camel case file names, but I'll get over it. Okay, so should I? Well, I guess I can create all these files here, right? So is that in a source folder? It's in an app folder. So let's add an app folder, and in there have the SSR TSX file and the client TSX file, and router TSX and router.gen.ts. So that's router TSX and this one. And then in there, the routes folder, and in there, this __ root TSX file. That's that. Okay. The router configuration. This is the file that will dictate the behavior of TanStack router used within Start. Here you can configure everything from the default preloading functionality to caching staleness. You won't have a route tree.gen.ts file yet. This file will be generated when you run. Okay, so I'll delete it. It's an auto-generated file, and my guess would be that this file will hold the types, the route types that will be inferred from my route definition. But we'll see. So into the router TSX file, I'll put this code like this. And what do we have here? So we have this import, which doesn't work yet because we don't have that file yet. We import create router and give it an alias, and we then call No, we export a function called createRouter, which is why we alias this one, so that we don't have a clash. And in this exported createRouter function, I'm creating a router object by calling the imported createRouter called create_TanStack_router. I pass my route tree, which doesn't exist yet because the import isn't there yet, to it under a property named route tree, and set scroll restoration to true. What else can we configure in there? I don't really get any helpful auto-completion. So is that everything I can configure here? Huh. Well, I guess it is what it is. And then we return that, and then down here we have some TypeScript magic, basically making TypeScript aware of the type of this createRouter function and adding it to the same type package, you could say, the library belongs to. Okay. So next, the server entry point. As TanStack Start is a server-side rendering framework, we need to pipe this router information to our server entry point. So I'll copy that into the SSR TSX file. So what are we doing here? We're importing create start handler and default stream handler and get router manifest from the TanStack router package, essentially, the TanStack Start package, essentially. We're importing this create router function. We export it in the other file, and then we're basically just bundling that all together, exporting the result of calling create start handler, which I guess under the hood sets up that server that will handle all incoming requests. So that is what this function probably will do. And we give it information about our router or how to create our router. And I guess it will then go ahead and do that under the hood. And then get router manifest. So whatever that is, returns the router manifest that should be sent to the client. So the information about our routes, I guess. This includes only the assets and preloads for the current route and any special assets. It does not include relationships between routes. Oh, interesting. Or any other data. So that's essentially something that will be used by the client to preload data or preload code bundles for future navigations, I guess, or load assets that are needed for the route the user is currently on. We'll see. Default stream handler, I guess we pass that to create start handler to support streaming data to the client, so that we basically can start sending data to the client whenever a request comes in, and we don't have to wait for the entire data to be prepared before we start sending the result back to the client. Client entry point into app client TSX. I'll take that. We need a way to hydrate our client-side JavaScript. So that's basically the same in all those frameworks, right? You always, all those full stack frameworks, I should say, you have like the backend server, and the idea is always that this server will essentially pre-render the page content on the fly, also enriched with data typically on the server, and then send it to the client. And on the client, we already have the client-side application running, since with all these frameworks, you essentially have a single page application after the initial page load. And therefore, the single page application that's already running receives the updated data from the client, updates the DOM, and makes sure that when the DOM is rendered, especially for this initial page load, it then hydrates everything, which means it attaches all the click listeners, all the event listeners in general, and makes it interactive. And that's what this entry point takes care of. It sets up the client side of this, or it sets up the single page application, essentially. It makes sure that the client side can take over and do its thing. So there is that. What is this Next.js drama? The Next.js drama with the security vulnerability, you mean? So as far as I know, and I only like watched it from the sideline, as far as I know, the problem was that there was a way to bypass authentication when set up only in the middleware JS file supported by, or in the middleware feature supported by Next.js, typically in this middleware JS file. And the drama was the fact that the Cloudflare CEO like went after Vercel and called them out for this security flaw and tried to get customers from Vercel and yeah, all that. Just bought your book, React Key Concepts. Anthony, thank you so much. I hope you'll like it. And that gives me an excellent opportunity to, of course, have a shameless plug about it. We're talking about this book. I also have it here. It's the second edition of my React book, brand new, entirely updated for React 19 and the latest version of React Router. And if you, like me, sometimes like learning with a book, this book is hopefully for you. It is, I think, awesome. And if you want to get it, you can find it on Amazon, of course. And yeah, I hope you'll like it, Anthony, and everyone else who got it. You're actually developing. I just wiped this out, bro. So yeah, I also tried to wipe it out. And you can go to my Maximilian Schwarzmüller extended YouTube channel where I upload all the VODs of my live streams. And there you can take a look at the, where is it? 2 hours of pain and agony video, and the title says it all. So that was my attempt to vibe code an application. Back to TanStack Router. So we got this client-side entry point, and then the root of the application. This is the entry point for all other routes. The code in this file will wrap all other routes. Yeah, so it's like the root node of this application, you could say. So in here, I have my, in there I have my React code, essentially, where I have my root component that takes over, or that's injected into the HTML document. So that sets up the client-side single-page application and makes sure that React is then able to like render all those components and make all those route changes, render all the components that need to be rendered because of those route changes, and so on. So that is very similar to what we have in Next.js, of course. We have a root document where we actually render the HTML and head elements, which helps with actually also manipulating those if we need to. So if we want to like set a title, we can do this here, I guess. And we can also add other meta tags, of course. Though I would guess that since we have this special head content component here, which is imported from TanStack React Router, I guess we have a more elegant way of updating this head content from inside our different route components if we need to. I know you were kidding, Internet Tube. I know you were kidding. All good. I just found my attempt towards vibe coding really refreshing and funny. Okay, so we got the root document, the scripts part here, which is basically like the placeholder for all the client-side scripts to be injected. Then the actual root component, which takes the root document as a wrapper and renders the outlet, and that, I would guess, is the placeholder for the actual route components. And then here I have a function, create root route, imported from TanStack Router. And we construct a route constant here by passing an object to create root route. And in this object, we have a head method, actually, a head property that takes a function. And this function returns an object where we can define the metadata and all the stuff that should be injected into this head component, which of course typically is different per route. It's not the same necessarily for all the routes. There are, of course, some things that are the same. And actually here, since it's the root route, we are injecting meta tags that I guess will be shared across all routes, since this isn't a root route. But I also guess we could overwrite them or add more head tags from inside the specific routes. And I would also guess that instead of using a function here, we could probably also set up a static object. No, we can't. Okay, it has to be a function. Sure. In this function, we can also define links and scripts that should be injected into the head section, which makes sense. So links for extra CSS and scripts, of course, for extra scripts that should be added. So I'll update the title to see that this works. We define our root component, and that's that. Okay. Writing your first route. Now that we have the basic templating set up, we can write our first route. This is done by creating a new file in the app routes folder. In this case, they're creating an index.tsx file. And I guess the name matters because I don't know yet whether TanStack Start actually uses file-based routing or if we will define routes in a file programmatically. I would guess they're using file-based routing, so I will also name my file index.tsx in the routes folder, index.tsx. And I guess that is simply like the starting page, the home page. Root.tsx is like the root document, the wrapper around all routes, and index.tsx is then the starting page, the root entry point that can be replaced with other pages. So importing something from Node here, and of course TypeScript complains about that because it's missing the Node types. So I will install them with npm install -d add types node. And that should make the error go away. And gone it is. So then importing create file route, use router, and create server function. Okay, so we got a bunch of stuff going on in that file. Let's see what it is. We have a file path constant, which contains the name of a file I don't have yet. We might create it later, or maybe it gets created here. We'll see. We have a function, an async function read count, which tries to convert some text to an integer. Yeah, it tries to read that file. And if it fails to do so because the file doesn't exist, we just use 0 as a starting value. So I guess we're managing a counter here where we're saving the count in that file. And if the file doesn't exist initially, we initialize it with a text of 0, or we return 0 as a default value here, I should say. We're not creating the file, we're just returning 0 as a default value, parsing this text to an integer. And then here I have a create server function provided by TanStack Start to, I guess, create a server function. We call that function getCount, and we configure it by passing an object to this create server function call, where we essentially define the method. Okay, so that this is a server function, I guess that will be triggered through a GET request, and the alternative would be a POST request. It's also interesting to see that we just have these two request methods, so there are no patch or delete requests for these server functions here. Now, I read before that there are, what did they call it? API functions or something like this. So I guess there also is a different way of exposing endpoints, and I would guess there you can have patch, delete, put. But my guess would be that the idea here with the server functions is that you trigger them, for example, with a form submission. And since the default HTML form only supports GET and POST, that's probably the reason why the TanStack Start server functions also only support that. So then there I have my, then we get back an object which has a handler method, as it seems. And to this handler method we pass, I guess, the code that should be a function that contains the code that should be executed when this server function is triggered. And simply telling by the name, I would guess that this works kind of similar to server actions in Next.js or to actions in Remix, React Router, that this in the end is some code here that will only execute on the server, so that will not make it to the client-side bundle. So my guess would be, and I don't know for sure, but my guess would be that here we can access a database, use the DB credentials, and so on, because this code will not make it to the client. Okay, so that's getCount. Then updateCount is another server function, this time triggered upon POST requests. Okay, this object returned by server function has various methods, as it seems, so that we can, for example, also validate the received data before we handle it. And I guess we can also attach middleware options for further configuration. I don't know what all these things do, but so we have basically like a pipeline. The request or the data that's submitted is funneled through, I guess. And then we make it to this code, which also executes on the server. And we can see here that this function, which we pass to handler, does, of course, not have to use any data if it doesn't need any. But if it does need to, it can be async. This one here isn't. this one here is. And it seems to receive an object that contains the data that was submitted with the request, I guess, the method that was used, a response object, which we can probably use for tweaking the response headers, I would guess, an abort signal, and a context object, which with, I guess, further information or metadata. But I don't know, but that would be my guess. I really need to turn off GitHub Copilot. Bunch of useless suggestions here. Okay, so again, we're reading the count because we're updating it, so we need to get the current count, I guess, with read count, which, remember, is this function that reads it from a file, or if the file doesn't exist, gives us 0. And then we're writing to that file, and that will create the file if it doesn't exist yet. So this count.txt file. And that basically like simulates a database in the end, a very simple and not very capable database, but nonetheless. And we essentially just update the count with the data we received. So data should be a number which we add to count. Then we make TanStack Start aware of the fact that we have a route here in this file by calling create file route. And we pass the path. Okay, that's good. That's interesting. So we pass a path to create file route, a path which we want to use for loading that route, I guess. And currently I get some TypeScript complaints here. My guess would be, since I haven't like ran TanStack Start yet, and we learned before that it wants to like dynamically generate a file with route information. So I guess that's why I'm getting this error. It will probably go away. But that's how we make it aware of this file and the fact, or of this route in this file. So I guess we'll learn later whether this has to be called index.js or if it could be called something tsx, and we could still map it to the root route, because it looks like the mapping actually happens here, and the file name might not matter, but we'll see. We assign a component that belongs to this route, which is this one, and like in Remix or React Router, a loader function. So I guess a function that runs before the route component is loaded to load some initial data that's needed by that component, to avoid having some loading spinners and stuff like that. So we have this home component here, call use router, which is a function provided by TanStack Router, and that gives us a router object, which we can use to call invalidate, which, telling by the name and how it works in other frameworks, will essentially tell TanStack Router that some data changed and it should re-evaluate this route and this route component to update it, basically. And we're doing this here because upon a click on this button, we call update count. So we can call this server function like this from the client side, but TanStack Start will make sure that the server-side code stays on the server side, and it will essentially make like a API request behind the scenes. So that's what's happening here. We're submitting some data, so in this case 1, so that we add 1. So we're in the end submitting like this data here. And technically, I guess technically this data here is submitted and then extracted here, and then that's how this is added. So how we assign this one or add this one to the count. Then we call router invalidate to have it update the DOM, and then yeah, we output the state here. And state is extracted from use router data, loader data, which is this loader function, which is essentially called, gives us the current count, and we get access to it in a component like this. And then when we call invalidate, the loader executes again, and this code all runs again, and we get the updated data. Lots of talking. I'm pretty confident that this is right, but now I want to see it in action. So now we can run npm run dev, and this will hopefully work. Let's see. If I run npm run dev, I get an error. Cannot read properties of undefined reading server. That is a pity. Now the question is, did I leave out some step here? Or did they leave out a step in their documentation? Because I think I did all of that. I installed all these dependencies, like we have TanStack React Start, TanStack Router, and Vinci. We have all that. We have React. We have Vite plugin React, and here, and Vite tsconfig paths. Yeah, I would say we have all that. You typoed something. And Civil, you always amaze me. You always catch those tiny errors. That's very helpful. Which typo? Oh, you followed. Okay, yeah. So I'll have to. Okay, that's the sad part. Where do I have a typo? Is the question now. So of course, like I got 2 errors in my files, and I would have expected that those get generated. Oh, yeah, I removed this define config here accidentally, as it seems. So with that out of the way, let's try again. That looks better. Okay, now we're rolling. Now this route3.genTS file was generated. We'll take a look at it in a second. First, I want to take a look at this app. So let's head over there. Oh, that's white. Sorry for the flashbang. But here we got this button. And if I press it, this is being incremented, so that works. And I guess also without, whoops, did not want to do that. I closed the browser. But the stream is still running, that's good. Okay, I entirely closed my browser, oh god. All my 5,000 tabs were gone on the other screen. Okay, so here we are. And I guess we have no error except for some 404 error, probably related to the fav icon. Okay, that's good. That's good. Yeah, no, that's no error, I guess. We got a 200 response here in the log. A not found error was encountered. Yeah, but I would guess that's probably just like some fav icon or stuff like that. Okay, so that is working. Yeah, I do have a lot of tabs, like I guess every developer. So what do we have in this generated file? We have import route as root route. So it's not just type definitions, it's actual TypeScript code, so JavaScript code in the end also. But in the end, it is dealing with defining the routes, yeah. So what I want to find out now, if I were to rename this to home, and then restart maybe, does this also work? No. So I guess it has to be named index, right? I don't want to save any file here. Yeah, okay. Well, good to know. So it seems to be some file-based routing going on too. Okay, so we got that. That is working. Let's continue now. So we built that. Now we can learn the basics. This guide will help you learn the basics, dependencies. Yeah, we did all that. It all starts with the router. This is the file that will dictate the behavior of TanStack router. Here we can configure everything from the default preloading. Yeah, we know that. This file, the route tree genTS file, contains the generated route tree and a handful of TypeScript utilities that make TanStack Start fully type safe. Okay. The server entry point, yeah, it deals with server-side rendering. It's important that a new router is created for each request. The getRouter manifest function is used to generate a router manifest, which is used to determine many aspects of asset management and preloading for your application on the client side. We saw that before in the tooltip, essentially. The default stream handler function is used to render our application to a stream, allowing us to take advantage of streaming HTML to the client. Yeah, as I explained, the client entry point. Hydration, the root of the application is basically that shell. That is all clear. Navigation. TanStack Start builds. One question I have is, routes are defined using create file route function. Routes are automatically code split and lazy loaded. Critical data fetching is coordinated. Now, I want to learn if the file names matter. And I guess we will learn in the routing guide. But, well, we can take a look at that. Yes. Most of TanStack router is written for file-based routing. While file-based routing is the preferred and recommended way, you can also use code-based routing. Oh, I like that. I like it if you can also do code-based routing, because I personally am not the biggest fan of file-based routing. But I will stick to it for this getting started introduction here, because the official docs kind of assume it as a default, I guess. So, while directories have long been used to represent route hierarchy, file-based routing introduces an additional concept using the dot character in the file name to denote a route nesting. Okay, so instead of having like a nested file system or directory for defining our routes, it seems we're having super long file names with dots in the names. As we see, well, we don't really see it here, I guess. Or can we have both? No, we can do both, I guess. Directories can be used to denote route hierarchy. Okay, so that's actually what I personally prefer. I'm a fan of nesting stuff, and I'm not a fan of having like 20 files or 100 files next to each other with super long, weird file names. But that's, of course, just my personal preference. And then we have all these file names, which seem to matter, as we learned. But we could also have like the dot approach here. Yeah. Getting started with file-based routing. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll get back to this later. Let's take a look at the TanStack Start documentation here. Navigation start. TanStack Start builds on TanStack Router. We can use the link component. Yeah, so that's essentially as we know it from React Router, right? We have a separate component for navigating. We can also do it programmatically with help of a function or some object we get from this use navigate hook. And we can even access the entire router instance if we need to perform invalidations, as we already saw. So yeah, let's give it a try. Let's add a second route. Let's say we have an about TSX file. How would that work? I guess I would have my function in there, my component function. Oh! Did it generate this for me? Okay. So we got some magic going on here. Probably with the dev server up and running, right? If I quit this. Okay. So if the dev server is up and running, and I add a new file in the routes folder, it automatically adds some code to it. It adds the route setup code, essentially, giving me a route component and this create file route code here with the path. That's convenient. So I'll rename this here to about, though, but okay. Okay, so that is how we can add a route, I guess. And now on this starting page, of course, we can go there, add the link component, which is imported from here, from TanStack Router, of course. And then I'm using that down here to set up my link to the about page. And I guess if I now use auto-completion here, yeah, I only get these two paths because we have this type-safe routing going on here. Yeah, it's a magic going on here with the creation, with the auto creation of this code. Nice. Okay, so that's one way of navigating, and then we also have like use navigate here. And we get navigate. So use navigate is also imported from TanStack Router. And this is it a function or is it an object? It's a function, I guess. We can also, is it not? Do I pass an object to it? Okay. But then here I could also like navigate programmatically, for example, upon a form submission or something like this. So with that link added, of course, now I got my link. Oh, this is a beautiful page. I got my link here, and that takes us to the About page. Good. So that's working. Not too bad. Server functions, so I guess that's pretty clear. We create them with create server function. They can be called from both the server during server-side rendering and the client, okay? And they can be used to fetch data from the server or to perform actions. Yeah, so that is, of course, what we essentially already saw here, right? With these two functions. That's what they're doing. Mutations, server functions, and I guess like the code never ends up on the client side. So server-side functions that can be called from both the server and the client side, but yeah. I don't think they're saying it here, but this code always only ends up on the server. Pretty sure. Mutations, we can also perform mutations, like change data in a database or stuff like that. We can use invalidate to get the router on the client side to fetch the loader data again. Okay, and if we were using TanStack query, we could also use query client invalidate queries to invalidate data. Yeah, okay, so combining it with TanStack query is probably very powerful, but I'll not do it right now. I first want to learn a bit more about TanStack Start, this framework. Thus far, I have to say I like their approach. It's, I guess, thus far quite similar to React Router / Remix, with one important difference, of course. And that difference is that the server function code is more like with Next.js. In Remix, React Router, you have like a loader and an action function, right? And if you have, for example, one page where you have multiple actions, you still only have one action function. So now you need to start using different HTTP methods or adding different body data to the different requests or query params, so that in that action function you can use a if statement to control which code should execute, so that you can find out why the action was triggered. And here you simply have different functions which you can trigger directly from inside the client-side code, which is a bit more convenient. So I like that. I like that compared to having to filter in the action function. Regarding the theme, I'm using this Cappuccino Mocha, a Cappuccino Mocha theme. Okay, data loading. Another powerful feature of TanStack Router is data loading. This allows you to fetch data for server-side rendering. Data loading is done using the loader function. We saw that. It's isomorphic, meaning they are executed on both the server and the client. For performing server-only logic, call a server function from within the loader. So, I don't fully get that. I mean, I understand that we can trigger the loader also from the client side, but clearly that's not what's happening here, right? This getCount function, after all, calls readCount, which reads a file, which won't work in the browser. So clearly here, we're only doing it on the server. And we can perform it only on the server, by calling a server function from within the loader, but I thought the loader is the thing that can execute on the server and the client. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure how to read that. But let's learn more in the data loading guide. Oh boy, that's a load of text. Data loading is a common concern, true. The router is the best place to coordinate these async dependencies, as it's usually the only place in your app that knows where users are headed before content is rendered. Yeah, the router is like the best place to fetch data, or yeah, I would say the best place, because typically when you visit a different page, you need different data. So where else to load it than with help of the router, I guess. Yeah, so we know the loader from Remix Router. I mentioned that before. TanStack Router has a similar functionality. Yeah, beyond these normal expectations of a router, TanStack Router goes above and beyond and provides caching like Next.js does, though hopefully a bit less aggressive than Next.js did, especially in the past. It's gotten better, but in the past, Next.js caching could really cause confusion since it also differed between development and production, which makes sense, but still could be tricky. But back to TanStack router. The router loading lifecycle. Every time a URL history update is detected, the router executes the following sequence. So it performs route matching to find out which route should become active, route preloading then thereafter, and then the data loading. Sure, and error handling if needed. Makes sense. Loved your mustache look from the last month. Yeah, the mustache will be back in the future. I just was a bit too lazy to shave today, so I got like this in-between mixture. There is a high possibility that TanStack's router cache will be a good fit for most smaller to medium-sized applications, but it's important to understand the trade-offs of using it versus a more robust caching solution like TanStack Query. Okay, so TanStack router does some caching, but we could replace it with TanStack Query's caching if we needed to, as I understand this. So the good thing is it's built in and easy to use. Awesome. Handling deduping, preloading, and so on. Coarse validation, automatic garbage collection. Just works, which is nice for getting started especially. But no persistence adapters model, no shared caching, deduping between routes. So I guess if we had like multiple routes, if we have something like parallel routes, not sure if TanStack router has this feature, but if we had it and we had like two routes loaded simultaneously and they were fetching data at the same time from the same source, as I understand it, TanStack router would not take care of that and would perform two requests instead of deduping those requests and only performing one and then sharing the data across the routes. I guess that's something that's missing here. No built-in mutation APIs, no built-in cache level optimistic update APIs. Yeah, so that's all, of course, a bit more advanced. You definitely might need some or all of these features, not just in super complex apps, but here for getting started, I guess I will stick to TanStack router and not use TanStack Query, since I don't know everything about TanStack Start and TanStack router yet. Far from it. Route loaders are called when a route match is loaded. They are called with a single parameter, which is an object containing many helpful properties. So I guess, where is it? Here, this loader. Yeah, it receives an object which I could destructure, where we can get things like the route params, which of course is often needed for loading data on dynamic routes. Parent match promise, not sure what that is. Maybe it helps with loading data in nested routes if we need data that was already loaded for the parent route, not sure. So yeah, bunch of stuff. I guess we'll learn more about it soon. Oh yeah, here. Abort controller, the route's abort controller, its signal is cancelled when the route is unloaded or when the route is no longer relevant. Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. So that's indeed pretty nice that we get this abort controller here, because this is actually something that you can use in the browser as well, but many people at least, don't know about it. This is a feature that exists so that when you start sending a request and the reason for why you were sending the request goes away, for example, a user leaves the page before the data is there, then it makes sense to cancel the request, to not waste bandwidth with a request where the response is not needed anyways. Now, here, of course, I'm not sending a request. I'm just loading data from a file. But if we were sending a request to some other API, for example, then I could actually use this abort controller, which is handled by TanStack router, to connect my request to it so that my request automatically gets canceled when TanStack router gives me the signal that the route is no longer needed, that the request is no longer needed. So that's good. That's nice to have. Okay, we can get the cause for the current route match, which is either enter or stay. Okay, so that of course can make sense if we only want to do something when the user first visits a route versus when it was invalidated, I guess. Some context, the parent route context. Okay, dependencies, depths, the object value returned from the route loader depths function. Okay, so it looks like we can use this to pass some extra data into the loader, not sure. Location, current route location, okay, parents, parent match promise. Yeah, not sure what that is. Preload, Boolean, which is true when the route is being preloaded instead of loaded. So if we want to do something else when it's currently being preloaded, makes sense too. And the route itself. Let's take a look at how we can control it and when the loader function is called. Yeah, that's interesting. I want to find out whether it's called on both the client and the server or just on the server. So to consume data, we can use loader data. We saw that. If you don't have ready access to your route object, for example, if you're deep the component tree, you can use get route API to access the same hook. Okay, so we can also get hold of the loader data in some nested components. So not just in this route component, like this home component here, but if I had some other component in there, if I would put this code here, let's say, into a separate component, then I could use get route API to get hold of that data, I guess. Yeah, okay. Interesting. Yeah, because use loader data is called on the route. Sure. So if I had, let's say, a components folder here with my stateful button, and in there I export my stateful button component, which is this button. Oops, here we are. So if I do that, then of course, okay, I'm also missing like the function now, but also the state. And at least for the state, what I can do, according to the docs, is I can call get route API for the root route, like this. And then I can get my loader, or my data, by calling a root route use loader data. And that will give me the data that is provided by this loader in the root route. So now I can use stateful button here. Now I wonder how I can get my this code here, which triggers a server action, if I can simply pass it via props. So if I have on update here, and let's make this any for now because I'm lazy. And then this here, this state, of course, should be data now, or state, and we also rename it to state here. And then here I can have on update, and now pass this code here to on update. And I guess I can also, of course, type it properly. It's not too difficult. It's just a function that returns nothing. Right? No. Okay, no, it's property on update does not exist on type intrinsic. Yeah, sure, because I also, of course, yeah, that is not the way to do it. That is not how TypeScript works. That is the proper way of typing this and destructuring this. Okay, so now, of course, the server is still running. I can go back here, and that still works. Okay, yeah, that's quite interesting, so that we can also access that from inside nested routes. Oh, got a lot of messages here. Got one in German. I'll just translate it here. Thank you for your course on Udemy. Will be able to get a new job because of them and improve my English. And the message was deliberately in German. Of course, I speak German, so Dankeschön, vielen Dank, thank you very much. Super happy to hear that the courses are helpful and that they even help you with improving the English. I guess that's what else could you get from a course? Thank you so much for the amazing feedback. Yeah, Next.js is less confusing now when it comes to caching. I don't think it's no caching, though. It's just way less aggressive. Last time I checked, at least. But yeah, it's way better now. Yeah, love you too, Muhammad. And hey, Max, is it possible to become a good programmer by going deep into Node.js and learning it very deeply and staying with it? For example, by learning the behind the scenes of Node.js deeply. For example, what do you think about statically typed languages? Can take a programmer to the next level, in my opinion. So, going deep into anything, no matter if it's Node.js or vanilla JavaScript, always makes sense, in my opinion, especially now with AI. Because unless you're convinced that AI will replace us all within the next few years, which I don't think, going deep and having a deep understanding will set you apart and will allow you to use AI efficiently and, well, in the end, give people a reason to hire you or whatever your goal is. So yeah, going deep into Node.js, if you like working with it, definitely a good idea, in my opinion. Is it possible to just import the update count function instead of passing it as a prop? That is a good question. Let's give it a try. You are right. It's not exported, right? But I don't think if I export it here in this index.txt file, I can't import it here because I would have like a cyclical dependency. Because I'm also importing stateful button here, so I would import stateful button and in stateful button import from here. I guess we could, of course, try to define those actions in a separate file, but I don't want to do that just yet because I want to learn what the conventions are regarding server actions and so on. So, dependency-based stale while revalidate caching. The good old stale while revalidate caching. I first got into contact with that when I had a deep dive into service workers back in 2017. TanStack router provides a built-in stale while revalidate caching layer for route loaders that is keysed on the dependencies of a route. So it uses the route path name as a key, basically to store the data for a route with the path name as a key. Okay, but if we provide additional loader depths to a loader function, for example, an object with search param values, then those are also used for router key, for cache keys, which makes sense because, of course, if you have the same route, and you load different data for different search params, for example, you want to take those search params into account for caching to make sure that the right data is retrieved for the cache for the different configurations of that route, so to say. So yeah, if a route's data is already in the cache, it will be returned immediately and then potentially be refetched in the background. So essentially that means that now here, I guess, if I reload this route, this 21, which is loaded from a file, is essentially fetched from the cache first. So it's not always making that round trip to the file, it's getting it from the cache if it exists there. Now, I guess if I delete this file and I reload, it does pick that up though. Because probably also, as it says in the docs, behind the scenes, it does at least potentially refetch it to ensure freshness of the data. Or maybe also because me removing a file in this project triggered the server to clear the cache. That could also be. To control router dependencies and freshness, TanStack Router provides a plethora of options to control the keying and caching behavior. Okay, so to control the caching of the data fetched for a route, we can use this loader depths thing. a function that supplies you the search params for a router. And so here in this loader function, we have no depths here, this thing, right? This gives us the search params, I guess. And that is also used as cache keys, as we learned. Are we talking about those? No, here we can set up loader depths. But what is that? Loader depths is a function. A function that supplies you the search params. So it's a function that gets the search params and then needs to return the values extracted from there, I guess. So I can return an empty object, for example. So that allows us to use search params and basically also make them available here. So I guess if I had something like this in here, then in the loader, I can use depths. And if I now do it like this, yeah. So I have access to this here. Whoops, I'm not using it here, and I'm not even getting this from my search params. I'm just hard coding this here. But this is how I configure what I want to extract from my search params, or set up any other extra data which I want to feed into my loader. And then here I can access it through depths. So that's something I can do here. And that helps with caching too, because it allows us to fetch different data for different configurations. After digging into several JavaScript frameworks, how do you go about picking one? Well, of course, you don't have to learn every new framework that is available. And in general, for picking one, if you need a job, it makes sense to pick React, Angular, depending on where you are, Vue, or Next.js. React Router is something you'll need for essentially any React-related job. So I would not go with the very exotic new frameworks if that is your main goal. If you want to grow personally, or you're looking to use a certain framework for your next side hustle, then of course I personally like playing around with experimental stuff and experimental frameworks. But that of course is up to you. But definitely, I think the worst thing is if you feel like you have to learn everything. That's definitely not the case. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff we can configure here to essentially configure caching. And I will not go through it in detail here because whilst this, of course, is important, I want to learn a bit more about route setup, dynamic routes, and stuff like that. Yeah, loader depths for search params, we figured that out. Yeah, so it is a detailed caching guide here, which makes sense because caching can be a foot gun. So it makes sense to have a lot of documentation for that. The context argument is an object containing a merged union of the parent router context, a parent route context, and the route's context provided by the before load option. So that is essentially a way for us, it's an object we can use for passing data around. Is that the case? The context will be available to all routes in the router and get copied and extended by each route. Yeah, so it's like one big gigantic data object. Is that the case? Oh, wow, it's changing the color here. So here, for example, we're fetching posts, or in this function. And then in the root route, we're creating an object that is aware of this fetch posts function, if I understand it correctly. Then here we are fetching posts. Okay, so here, for example, we use this context object to pass a pointer to this pre-configured fetch posts function down to some other route. Okay. Got it. Yeah, okay, so you can use this context object to pass presumably also data and definitely also functions around. Path params, that will become important. How do we have to name? If we have a dynamic, so let's say we have a blog here, right? So in there I have, of course, my good old index.tsx, and then if I have a blog post. Is that how I would do it? So here I have my blog, yeah, my blog, and here I have my post route. And then I could, in my loader here, I get my params and then, yeah, okay. And I like this type safety, I have to say. So because I named this post ID, it generated this setup here. And because of that, I can access and only access post ID here. Like I get the auto completion. And if I try to access ID here because I forgot how I named this, because I can't see it, don't know, I get an error. So it's a tiny thing. And of course it would be an error you typically figure out pretty quickly, but still, I like that. So now I could return this here, and then I guess here I could get my post ID by using route use loader data, right? And again, type safety. It knows that this is a string because I'm returning a string here. And then here I could output post ID. So if I therefore go to /blog, I see hello blog, and if I enter ABC thereafter as a post ID, I see hello ABC. So that's how that works. That's really intuitive, and I like that. I have to say I like it. It's of course not groundbreaking new, but I like their approach, and I like the type safety. Using route context, passing down global context to a route is great, but what if you want to provide context that is specific to a route? This is where the before load option comes in. Before load option is a function that runs right before attempting to load a route and receives the same parameter as a loader. Beyond its ability to redirect potential matches, block requests, okay, so we can also use that for authentication, for example, I guess. It can also return an object that will be merged in the route's context. So we can set up a before load function that does something, gets us some data that we then merge into the context, which is then available, as we can see here, in our loader. Now, of course, I guess for data fetching, I don't see the immediate advantage because I could just fetch data in the loader anyways. I definitely see the advantage of using before load for authentication, for example, since they're mentioning that you could use it to block requests and so on. Outsourcing data loading in there probably has its use cases, which I just don't see yet. But I guess it's generally not bad to have flexibility, which you might rarely need, than missing a feature which you do then sometimes need and you don't have it then. Search params, loader depths. Yeah, we saw that before. Directly accessing search params in a loader function can lead to bugs in caching and preloading. Yeah, so they have this approach of essentially getting us the search params also to help with caching, as we learned before. And we have a validate search method which we can set up here to basically run some code on the search params to validate them before they even make it in there. So it's like, I feel like with TanStack query, they in general they like this pipeline approach where, for example, we also saw that with the server function before, right here, where you can call a validator before you handle it. And now here we have something similar. If I expect to get some search params, I can first funnel them through validate search here to perform validation, and then I get them here and I can transform them if I want to and control how they will be provided to the loader, for example. So looks like they're really like embracing this pipeline approach in different areas. That's nice. Definitely like a clear way of handling this. Leading to relatively lean individual functions, I would guess. And we can use sort for validation here. Interesting. Yeah, I see the appeal of that, like having very lean functions, being able to use sort here, all structured that way. Of course, also makes it simple to create reusable functions that we could use in different routes, where maybe not all functions and not all routes need the same parameters, but where we have some shared validation logic or stuff like that. Using the abort signal, yeah, I mentioned this before. Like if you're using the fetch API specifically, it has a signal property which you can set. So if I go here and I try to fetch something from this API, let's say, which doesn't exist, in this config object there is this signal thing here which wants an abort signal, and that's exactly what we're getting here with this abort controller, right? Or sorry, the abort controller is an object. It has an abort function, but it also has this signal thing. And that is then connected, and this abort controller, this signal will be triggered by TanStack Start if the route, for example, if the navigation is canceled, and that of course allows us to then cancel this request, which is useful. We can use the preload flag when the route is preloaded, in case we need to handle data loading differently in that case. Handling slow loaders, okay. We can show a pending component if we want to. By default, TanStack router will show a pending component for loaders that take longer than 1 second. Interesting. So what does it show in that case? If I go, I mean, currently we are calling getCount here. And getCount is, where is it? Here is this function. So in there, if I make this async and I import set timeout from the node timers package, which also not a lot of people know, but I also in the past always built my own promise wrappers around set timeout and set interval, but turns out Node.js has them built in since version 15. So that is set timeout as a promise. So now in get count, I can await set timeout 3000 to wait 3 seconds so that this data fetching takes longer. With that, we can see, if I go back to the root page, what we see as a placeholder. So I saw the old page as a placeholder. So I guess it shows me the old content. Now, what if I have no old content? Okay, so is that the placeholder, the old content? Doesn't say it here. Hi, Sim. Happy to hear you reading the book. Happy to hear you liking it. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for getting it, and thanks for the amazing feedback. Means a lot to me. As I always say, truly does. Thank you very much. Okay, handling errors. So I'm not sure regarding this placeholder. I would guess we can also configure it. Here I learn how I can configure how long it should take, how long it should wait before it shows a pending component. But yeah, I guess we'll get back to that later. Handling errors, we can define an onError function, which will be triggered if something goes wrong. So here we're logging the error. How can we also like update the UI? Yeah, with error component, okay. We get onError and onCatch, and I would assume the difference is that onError is for all those crashes. Pending component is an option. Okay, I guess onError is for crashes and onCatch is, for example, for 404 errors. I would guess. I'm not sure. Okay, so if I add an error component here, yeah, it's a standard React component in the end, which gets a props object, which has an error object inside of it. And then I can output something went wrong. And if I want to, I can, of course, also share those error details like this. And now if I generate an error by throwing a one, for example, like this, then I guess I see that fallback after 3 seconds, or that error component. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Makes sense. That all makes perfect sense. If the error was the result of a route load, you should instead call router invalidate, which will coordinate both a route reload and an error boundary reset. Okay, so in the error component, I can offer a button to invalidate the router to try reloading the page. Yeah, makes sense. Default error component. There is a default error component I could use. Okay, okay. So that was data loading. So I guess now we can dive into all these other parts here in the docs. And I'll get back to routing for now. Hey, glassy drink. Yeah, excited to hear you're going to order the book. I hope you'll like it. Definitely let me know in the next stream if you want to. I'm excited to hopefully see it soon in your hands too. Well, I won't see it, but knowing. Yeah, so I hope you'll like it. Hi, Juan. Okay, so routing concepts, anatomy of a route. Yeah, we saw that, that we have like this configuration thing here, the create file route function. This one here, where we define the component, but then also this entire loader and error stuff here. And there are lots of properties we can set. So we can define the head, for example. That's also interesting. Let's go to the, no, let's first actually go to the here and do this pending component thing. So that's what Uncivil mentioned. I can set up my loading component like this. And now I should see that for the 3 seconds. Oh, the server crashed as it seems, but it's back. So now if I reload, but I still don't see that somehow. I have a pending component and I have a function that takes some time to load. I'm awaiting it here. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing this pending component, this fallback component here. It's also not too important, but it's kind of weird. Maybe it's if I'm navigating around with links. Yeah, maybe only on soft navigation, yeah. So I guess what we can, of course, do is we can add another link here, go to blog, to go to the blog page. And on the blog, I can, whoops, I can also do two things. First, I'll add a link here too, which goes back to the home page, so that we can see whether we see the pending component if we navigate like this. And I also want to update my head here. As we saw before, we can do that by returning an object here, which allows us to set some new metadata. And there, for example, I pass an array of metadata objects to, for example, set the title to my blog, like this. Of course, we could also write this a bit shorter. Whoops. Like this. So that's also something we can configure here. Now, besides that, we can configure the loader, the garbage collector time as it seems, the context object for this route, before load, various hooks here. If we want to, I guess we can also execute code when the component is about to load or is currently loading or rendering, I should say. When the user leaves, that's also interesting. Doing something when the user leaves can also sometimes be something you want to do, like cleanup work and so on. But what's params? Is that like a function we can set up for parsing or manipulating the params? Is that something we can do here? Well, not sure. I guess we'll find out. So now with that, though, if I go to my blog, for one, the title updates now that I reloaded at least. Yeah, okay, now I see the loading page if I have a soft navigation. Okay. Yeah, and now the title also updates immediately. And here we can see, oh, that's interesting. Here we can see that now we went back immediately because the caching basically kicked in. But since I had a hard reload before, and now I hard reloaded again, if I hard reload here, if I go back, then it's not instant because basically like the cache was invalidated. So that's something I really like, having like this instant navigation. And I know the page looks horrible, but having this instant navigation and having this caching, definitely a useful thing. So yeah, we have a root route. We know all that, basic routes, index routes, so which are basically like the root routes for their respective folders in which they sit. Just as I have like this index route here in the blog folder. This is the root route that's loaded if we visit /blog. And on the other hand, this is the index route in the routes folder, and that's the overall root route. And I guess alternatively to having a blog folder with the index route, I could have also added a blog TSX file here and not have the blog folder, because now the index route here and the blog TSX file, they're competing, I would guess. But that is something I could have done instead. A video on Astro.js, excellent idea. I definitely want to do that because, for example, I built my website with Astro.js and I like it a lot. So yeah, that is definitely something I'd like to do. Probably a live stream. But then it will also be made available as a video on my second YouTube channel, of course. Dynamic route segments, we saw that. That's essentially what we have here, right? So that's a dynamic route segment with the $sign at the beginning. We can also have splat catch all routes. A route with the path of $sign is called a splat route. So if it's just $sign, I guess. Not sure. The captured path name is then available in the params object. Yeah. Okay. So if I wanted to set up like a 404 route, I guess that is how I could do it, right? So now I could have my loader here. Is that not how it works? Loader, async, params. Yeah, splat. And that's also interesting. Like here on the post ID route, there's just the post ID parameter property on this params object. But now here in this route, it understands that this specific path means that it's this catch all route. So then I do have safe access to this underscore splat thing. And that essentially the idea is it collects everything after / essentially. Now, I don't want to have that route here, but that's interesting. We can have layout routes to wrap child routes with a shared layout. And we of course have one layout route already, this special root route, right? We have like a root layout, whatever I would add here. If I added like hello world here, h1 tag, then we would have this on all our pages, right? We have it here, we have it in the blog, we have it everywhere, because it's in the root layout. But of course, we can also have nested layouts, like a blog layout. I just need to find out how to define them by... So they're using this dot-based route setup where the dots are essentially like the slashes in the URL, in the path. So how do we define a layout route? By using wrapping child routes with a layout route. Okay, so do I create... Okay. The route.tsx file is the configuration for the layout route. Okay, so if I want a block-specific layout route, I would use route as a file name, route.tsx. And then in there, I guess, I can have like h2, my block. And this is all super ugly. Well, it's just about the logic and the functionality here. And then I need an outlet, which is the placeholder for the actual child routes that will be loaded into this layout. Right? And it's for these child routes because it sits in a block folder. So it's the layout route for everything in the block folder, including nested routes, I would guess. So now with that, on the starting page, I just have hello world, but on the go to blog page, I also have my blog. And of course, the same is true if I visit some blog post here, right? I have my blog here as well because it's in that layout route. Okay. Pathless layout routes, like layout routes, pathless layout routes are used to wrap child routes with additional components and logic. So, however, pathless layout routes do not require a matching path in the URL and are used to wrap child routes with additional components and logic without requiring a matching path in the URL. Yeah. With an underscore at the beginning, okay. So the idea is that if I have two routes, A and B here, and I want to have a shared layout or shared functionality, because in such a layout route, of course, since it is a regular route, I can also load data, for example. So I can use it for both shared markup and shared data, logic, whatever. If I want to have shared data or markup, but I don't want to have for these two routes, but not for other routes, but I don't want to manipulate the URL path, I can use this underscore in front of a folder, and that allows me to group files together and connect certain files to a shared layout without introducing a new path in the URL. Because of course here, blog is an actual path in the URL, right? We can see that here. Blog is in the URL. And that's on purpose here, of course. But if I had some routes that should not have a new nested path above them and should still share a layout, I could use such a pathless layout route. So that's a feature that's always nice to have. Non-nested routes. So I guess that makes sense if you're using this dot notation here, where normally the dot would introduce one level of nesting. If you don't want it, but you want to have this dot notation, you can use the underscore in front of the dot and you won't get nesting, I guess. And then we can have route groups. Okay, if we just want to, so in that case, that's really just if we want to organize routes together for us visually to like have them in different folders without those folders having any effect on the path. We can give the folder names which start and end with parentheses, and then they just act as logical for just as folders to group stuff together without any impact on the application. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Route trees. So I guess that's about route matching and so on. Or this is about route matching. File-based routing, we know that. Virtual file routes, what's that? Virtual file routes are a powerful concept that allows you to build. And by the way, we're in the TanStack router documentation now. So TanStack Start really looks like it's just like a small layer above TanStack router, adding server-side rendering, but now it's really all router stuff here. And we could use TanStack router also without server-side rendering, of course, in any client-side React app. That's just worth noting, I guess. But now that I said that, I actually want to go back to the TanStack Start docs and take a look at what's TanStack Start specific. Because obviously we could dive super deep into TanStack Router, and I might do that in a future stream. But I'm here for TanStack Start. So actually, let's go back to the TanStack Start docs. Let's see what's TanStack Start specific. So we had all the basics here, I guess. Server functions, let's learn a bit more about them. Because of course that is definitely a TanStack Start specific thing. Having these functions that we define side by side with the React components, but nonetheless having them being called or being executed on the server despite being callable from the client-side code. That's the kind of magic I really like about frameworks like this, that they make it super simple to connect backend and frontend and call your backend code with these from the client side without exposing the backend code to the client side, which is nice and crucial in many cases. So server functions allow you to specify logic that can be invoked almost anywhere, even the client, but run only on the server. So that's the key part. They do not have a stable public URL. So behind the scenes, that's important to understand. Behind the scenes, it's not really a function call at runtime, but behind the scenes, a request is sent. And we can see that actually. If I go back to the starting page here, and I should get rid of that timer since it's now just annoying. So if you go back to the starting page, if I click this button, this counter changes. If I reload, we fetch data, right? But watch what happens in the network tab. As I click this counter, you see there's a request being sent. A request being sent to this URL, right? And that's of course not some route I set up here. Instead, that is a route dynamically generated by TanStack Router. And it generates these routes based on these functions. So in our code, it looks like we call those functions, but actually TanStack Router during the bundling process removes that function call, you could say, and replaces it with a fetch call with a HTTP request that's being sent to an API endpoint, which it creates dynamically on the fly, based on our server functions here. That's what's happening. The same thing, by the way, in the end happens with server actions in React. I also, again, sorry, I also covered this in my React Key Concepts book. I talk about how server actions work behind the scenes there. So that's what's happening also here. And these URLs to which the requests are sent are not stable. But you'll be able to do this very soon. Them not being stable can have a security advantage because it means that if someone looks up those URLs, I mean, you can easily see them in the developer tools after all, right? If someone looks them up, they may change over time with future deployments. And that, of course, can help with avoiding requests being sent to these URLs by bad actors with help of scripts or from the command line. Because anyone can send a request to this URL, of course, not just a client-side application. Now, I would guess that there is some way of validating where the request is coming from to only execute the server-side code if it's coming from the client side. But nonetheless, the URLs are, of course, exposed to everyone. That's just how the web works. We can call these server functions from anywhere in the application. So, sorry, that is of course from inside the component as we're doing it here. But as we learn here, we could also do it from inside a loader, from inside React hooks, and so on. But not from API routes. API routes, we haven't seen them yet. Here are the docs. I guess are separate routes that are really meant to be exposed as REST APIs, whereas the server functions are not. They are meant to be called from this client side. API routes are meant to be called from any client, not just from our app. Could be called from a mobile app, from a command line, anything. Good. Okay, so we have access to the request context, allowing us to read headers, set cookies. Okay, so that's this this context here, right? So we got a context. Do we not? Is it like an additional argument? Here we can configure them, also good to know. So how do we get access to the context object? I only have access to response and type here. Oh, maybe here in the handler? Oh yeah, there's the context. But I don't have access to anything there. Okay, I guess we'll find out how this is configured. So we can use them to also set cookies and so on, or read cookies, I guess, which is important for authentication, for example. Can do any server-side logic. So we can, for example, send a request to a different API. We can, of course, also reach out to a database or write to a file, as we're doing it in this demo application. And hi, Dragnov. Greetings back to Reunion Island. Definitely a nicer place to be than cloudy, rainy Germany at the moment. Yeah, so the server function code is removed from the client-side bundle so that it's not exposed there. We can use middleware to share logic, context, common operations. There is a separate middleware guide. Okay, we'll probably get to that later, or maybe in the next stream. I'll have to go in like a quarter hour. We'll see. Okay, but here that's how we can define them. We can also... Yeah, we can configure. Oh, okay, so that's not a response object we can get access to. Instead, that is, here we can configure that will send back a data response, but at the moment that's also the only thing we can send back. Okay. No, here it says full raw. So that default mode, data, makes sure that incoming JSON data is parsed, and we return just data. We could also get access to the full response object with result data, error information, context, or raw. But I cannot set this to full here. Oh, I can. Okay. And then I can get access to the response object here. Is that the case? No. No, response is just full. Huh. Not sure about that. Yeah, we can call them from server and client side. We saw that. We can... server functions accept the single parameter. What do they mean with single parameter? I guess this thing here, which is passed to the handler. Or when we call them. Oh yeah, when we call, okay, yeah, when we call them. So when we call a function down here, we can pass an object to it. We could just pass a number or a string to it, but we could also pass form data to it, or a readable string, or a promise. Okay, so that's what we could pass to them when we call them. Runtime input validation type safety. Yeah, with the validator, we saw that. And we also saw that we can use sort there for validation, as it seems. And again, that's this approach where like the process is broken up into multiple steps. Instead of doing everything in the handler, which of course could also be done, we're essentially breaking it up to perform validation in a separate function and then handle it in a separate function. And the advantage, of course, is not just that each function is a bit shorter and maybe cleaner, depending on what you consider clean, but also that we have code that maybe is a bit easier to share if we have, as I said before, same validation logic in different parts of the app, in different routes. Yeah, we can use sort. We have type safety. We saw that before. Inference, server functions infer their input and output based on the input to the validator and return value of handler. Yeah, so we also saw that if I return in my blog post, for example here, if I return params post ID, which is a string TypeScript understands this, and when I then get access to the loader data here, it also understands that this is a string. So we got perfect type inference here, where we can't accidentally access or expect the wrong kind or shape of data in our component, but where instead TypeScript will yell at us if we expect something different or we use it differently. So here, if I, for example, try to get the data property, I get an error that post ID is a string and has no data property. So that, of course, is pretty nice. We can accept JSON serializable objects as parameters. This is useful for passing complex data structures to the server. Form data, yeah, so we can pass all kinds of data. We can handle form submission, for example, by just collecting the data, constructing a form data object, and calling our server function with that form data, right? So that is also something we can do here. Yep. That all makes sense, yeah. Please also cover more advanced animations in your cascading style sheets course. To be honest, an update for this course is not planned right now, but if we will update it, definitely we'll dive way deeper also into all the new CSS features that exist. But yeah, time is always the issue, unfortunately. Holger, no problem that you missed the stream, because of course I will upload it tomorrow to my second channel, Maximilian Schwarzmüller Extended on YouTube. So you can watch it there if you want to. Server function context. In addition to the single parameter that server functions accept, you can also access server request context from within any server function using utilities from TanStack React Start server. So how does this work? In our handler. Oh, okay. Interesting. So if you want to get access to the actual incoming request, we don't do that with help of some parameter that we receive, but instead by calling get web request from this server sub package here. So I guess back in my blog here, maybe. Oh, no. Let's go back to the server function here in the root route. If I call get web request, or let's maybe do this here in the update function. Get web request. No, that was the wrong one. Get web request from TanStack React Start server. That's the right one. So this gives me a request object. Where is it? Here. Right? Yeah, I have to call it as a function, of course. But it's actually a readable stream. Get web request gives me a readable stream, as it seems. Get headers would give me access to the headers. Can we also set the headers then with help of that? I guess we'll get to that. But that's an interesting way of getting hold of requests and headers. Of course, useful because sometimes you need to read some headers, but interesting that you're not getting them through some parameter, but that you instead call these functions. Great, Holger. Yeah, thank you so much for subscribing. Yeah, we'll be up tomorrow around noon German time. Server functions can return different values. Yeah, we can basically return any serializable value like an object, and it will be wrapped into JSON and sent back to the client and be accessible there. But we can also, that's interesting, we can redirect errors. We can also throw them. And not found. So there is a not found function, I guess, which we can call to trigger a not found error, a 404 error. Which makes sense because, for example, in the blog post here, we could be checking if params post ID is, let's say, ABC, which is, of course, totally made up. We could say this post doesn't exist. So I guess then we can call not found. And let's see if that is enough, or if I need to, now I need to return it, I guess. right? Not found. Or do we need to throw it? Let's throw it. So now with that, if I visit the ABC blog post, let's see what happens. Huh. I got a 404 error. I'm just not handling it, I guess. So I would probably handle it with the error component here. Is that how I handle it? No. I briefly see not found here, by the way. Well, I guess the docs will help us at some point. But we can return different kinds of responses. And then I just need to find out how to handle them correctly. We can respond with custom headers. Okay, so all that's really kind of weird, but I guess just the theme of how they do that. We can get headers and set headers simply with help of these extra functions provided by this TanStack React Start server package. So that's how we set headers. We saw how we can get headers before. So yeah, okay. Just something to get into. Same for setting the status code. It's all done with those extra functions. Okay. We can also set response to raw and return a raw response if we want to. Okay, so if we want to have full control over the response that is being sent back, we can set response to raw. And that would allow us, for example, to set up a response with the response constructor that's provided by Node.js in the end, and set up a readable stream like this if you wanted to for server sent events here in this case. Yeah, so that's what we're doing here. This is basically the code for server sent events, which means like the server is constantly emitting data to the client. Okay, we can throw errors. Oh, yeah, of course, I have to be careful. Here, I'm in a loader. So maybe we can also use not found here, but I'm in the article about server functions, which is not the same thing. So maybe that's why throwing not found did not work as expected here. You probably handled that differently in the loader. Yeah, makes sense, makes sense. But in the server function, we can throw errors and then we can actually handle them, which is pretty nice, right inside of the component function. So we call a server function in the component function behind the scenes that will send this request. And if we then throw an error in the server function, that I guess will send back a response, a 500 response or something like that. And the client-side code injected by TanStack Start will, in the end, throw a JavaScript error in the client side, which we can then handle like this. So that's a very elegant way. That's really great. That's really removing a lot of complexity that comes with handling errors related to sending requests and handling responses. That's such a convenient, nice way of doing it. Really nice. Okay, yeah, so there's a bunch of nice stuff in there, I have to say. And I like how calling those server functions generally works. I have no in-depth experience with this. I'm just getting started. This is my first look at TanStack Start, but it looks like such a nice blend of Next.js server actions and React router actions, like the best of both worlds maybe. So looks really promising, but maybe I'm sure it also has its problematic areas. They all have. What's the issue you are seeing? I'm not sure which issue you mean. Currently, there is no issue. Just trying stuff out and then getting into TanStack Start. It's great that you have introduced Framer Motion in your React course, but there are certain animations, for example, the Next.js website, that are difficult to implement. Yeah, of course, that's like always the thing. I can't cover all possible scenarios in my courses. The goal always is to give you like a solid foundation, especially here with Framer Motion in the React course. This is such a huge course covering so much React stuff. It has like 70 hours, I think. I can, of course, not cover everything in depth. It is already super in depth, but I focus on the core React functionalities and not on all third-party libraries, because it would be like a 120-hour course, which is not just impossible to create, but also, I guess, impossible to take. So I always try to find a trade-off. Okay, yeah. So we can throw redirects to trigger redirects. So that's interesting. We throw them, we don't return them. We can also set our own headers if we want to. We can throw not founds. And then how do we handle that? How do we handle when calling a server function, a special not found error can be thrown to indicate that the requested resource was not found. If not found is thrown from a server function used outside of a route lifecycle, it will not be handled automatically. But if it is thrown from inside the route lifecycle, I assume it is handled automatically. And maybe I just would need to define a 404 route or something like that. Not entirely sure, but it definitely has kind of like built-in support for 404 stuff, since it's a core feature of TanStack Router. So I guess I would just need to dive into TanStack Router to learn how to configure or set up 404 pages there. Yeah, we can handle errors. We saw that before with try catch. Okay, this is now in the loader, but still, I really like that you just call the server function. No matter where you call it, you can just try catch it, and that's it. Yeah, no, okay, if JavaScript is disabled, so that's always the thing. I always find this a bit funny, because Remix also does this, that they all give you like this path you can take if JavaScript would be disabled, that they fall back to the native HTML support with submitting forms and then sending requests automatically if a form is submitted. And that's all nice, and I think it's nice to have that fallback, but I'm not sure how much of an issue this really is, but I'm not sure how many people really have JavaScript disabled. And if they do, chances are high that many parts of our website are broken anyways. I mean, there is a reason why we're using a JavaScript framework or library like React in the first place. So if someone has JavaScript disabled, chances are high that the web page will in general not be that pleasant to use by them. But yeah, of course, it's nice to have like all this fallback logic. Oh boy, there's a lot in there. Static server functions. Static server functions are server functions that are executed at build time and cached as static assets. Yeah, so that's also a nice feature. I guess if you're, for example, building a blog where you maybe have your blog posts in your project, then you could, I would guess, use such a static server function to fetch all the blog posts already at build time, and therefore not make those requests at runtime, because the data won't have changed anyways if all your data is contained in your project. So that, of course, would allow you to serve them way faster without fetching anything dynamically at runtime. And ultimately, you, of course, wouldn't need server-side rendering. I guess you could pre-render everything, but I guess that is something that you could achieve with this static feature here. So it's nice to have features like this if you have situations where some data might not change a lot. So there is obviously more to cover. I really like TanStack Start. It looks very promising. I think it's still in beta. Not sure. Is it still in? Yeah, it's still in beta. So it's not even stable yet. And still, what I saw thus far, I like it. Of course, I did absolutely not build anything complex here. I mean, look at it. It's not a complex page. Just clicking around, just tried out a bunch of stuff, went through the docs. But what I saw there, what I tried out worked really well. So yeah, I'm out of time now, but I guess I'll come back to TanStack Start and dive a bit deeper into it and maybe maybe build something more useful with it. Maybe also explore authentication and all that stuff here, because that all really looks promising. Looks like a promising framework. Obviously, we already have Next.js, we have Remix. Not sure if there is place for another framework, but yeah, it looks nice, and I'll take another look at it, I guess. So thank you all for being part of that stream today. I hope it was helpful. I hope you liked it. As I mentioned multiple times, it will be uploaded tomorrow on my channel here, Maximilian Schwarzmüller Extended on YouTube. And I plan on streaming every week, every Thursday typically. Maybe sometimes I won't be able to make it, but thus far over the last weeks I only missed one stream, so maybe you're back next week. I hope you liked it. Thank you so much for being part of the stream, and yeah, see you in the future. Bye.